You are listening to the Under the Rug podcast with Nalini Tranquim.
Hey friends, I'm Nalini Tranquim. Welcome to Under the Rug. Today's conversation may be rooted in the UK, but make no mistake, this is not just a British issue. Across the globe is a seismic shift underway. In the United States, states like New York and Florida are actively pushing legislation to legalize assisted suicide. In Australia, every state has already passed voluntary assisted dying laws, with further reforms looming. This episode is for our global audience because what takes root in first world nations, cloaked in the language of compassion and choice, inevitably ripples outward into the developing world. And with those ripples come ethical dilemmas, spiritual consequences, and a dangerous redefinition of what it means to protect life. Right now in the UK, Parliament is debating a bill that's being sold as compassionate, dignified, even progressive. But what's really behind the end of life bill? Is this truly about mercy, or is it about playing God? With both euthanasia and assisted suicide still illegal in the UK, how has this even made it to the floor of Parliament? Well, today we're joined by Dr Susan Marriott, Head of Public Policy at the Christian Medical Fellowship, to unpack the uncomfortable truth behind what's being dressed up as healthcare reform and why, as the church, we cannot afford to be silent. This isn't just policy, this is spiritual warfare, and it's time for the church across nations to wake up, speak up, and rise up. Dr Susan, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, great to be across the world virtually with you. It's great to be with you.
Yes, it's such an honour to have you. Before we dive in, could you just help us understand what exactly is the end of life bill currently being debated in the UK Parliament and what does it propose?
Yeah, thank you. So we have a bill being debated in Westminster, if you'd said, which would apply to England and Wales, and it would be amending the Suicide Act. So at the moment in England and Wales, it's illegal to encourage or assist someone who wants to end their life through suicide, right, and rightly so. But they want to amend that act so that if the circumstances met in the bill are met, it would be legal for a doctor to prescribe drugs to a patient that they would use to end their life prematurely. And there are conditions on that, of course. So it's for patients who are adults over 18 who doctors agree there's a reasonable chance that they've got 6 months left to live, although we're not very good at estimating that, so it would necessarily catch many more people, and that they've got a kind of settled wish to do this, and that they've got mental capacity, which is quite a low bar test. It sort of says that you can understand what you're choosing, that doesn't exclude, patients with mental health conditions and things like that, but it says they have the capacity to understand. And assuming that those kind of sort of tests are met, and there's two doctors would assess, and then a panel would check the assessment. If all that is met, then the doctor, as I said, would be able to prescribe them drugs, which the patient would take to end their life. So it's, they're using drugs given to them to end their life prematurely, and the doctor would stay with them until they die. And it's stark even saying it like that, isn't it? But I think it's so important that we understand the sort of thing that we're talking about here. But that's the bill.
That's brutal, my goodness. And we're talking about a human's life here.
Yeah. And I think, people often misunderstand what we're even talking about in this case. So the people bringing the bill will use the term assisted dying for this. But of course, lots of people understand all sorts of things by that. They might understand helping dying people, with pain relief, right. Or they might understand, stopping treatment. Someone who's, their chemo's not helping them anymore and they want to stop, or whatever it might be. They might think that's what we're talking about. But both of those things are legal already, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a doctor giving drugs to a patient to end their life.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've just got to get my head around this. I knew this was going to be a massive topic, but wow. Okay. That was just brutal to hear. Dr. Susan, for many of our listeners, terms like euthanasia and assisted suicide can be confusing. Can you please just explain the difference and
Yeah.
where this bill actually fits in?
Yeah. So assisted suicide is where the doctor gives the drugs to the patient, but they take them themselves. And that's what our bill in the UK is proposing at the moment. Although the line is actually a bit blurry, and I could explain that in a minute. But let me just say what euthanasia is first. So euthanasia is where the doctor's the one who takes the action. So maybe they inject the patient or deliver the drugs some other way. So the doctor actively gives the drugs to the patient to end their life. So the difference is who kind of does the final act. In assisted suicide, the patient's the one doing it. In euthanasia, the doctor's the one doing it. The reason I said our bill is a bit blurry is because it's quite clear in the bill that the final act has to be with the patient, but it does say that the medical professional can assist them with that. And where does the line come with that? In the bill committee, some of the MPs were talking about it, and they were saying, is it if I put the cup to their lips? Is that okay? Is it if I tip the cup, and put the substance into their mouth as long as they swallow? Where does the line come between assisting someone to do something themselves and doing something to someone? So I think the boundary's not always as clear cut as we would want to say, but that's the distinction in this. And our bill is intending to be assisted suicide, although, as I said, some people feel there's a fuzziness there.
Yeah, okay. So, given that both euthanasia and assisted suicide remain illegal in the UK and carry serious legal penalties, how has this bill gained so much traction?
Yeah, I think this has been coming for a while. So there has been a push amongst some groups and some big campaign groups. There's a lot of money behind this. And I think the motivations are kind of broadly in two groups. I'm sure there's more, but one of the campaign groups has the title "My Death, My Decision," and that kind of autonomy is a big thing that comes through. And a sort of famous campaigner in the UK, Esther Rantzen, she was a sort of TV star in the UK, and she's been a big campaigner for this. And that's a line she often takes. That she should have the right to choose the manner of her death. She should be able to choose to have family around her, to do it on the time that she wants, on her terms. So I think that's a big driver that, particularly from often white, more wealthy, of a generation where they've perhaps had a lot of control and things have gone well in their life, and they've been used to, that kind of lifestyle. As they get closer to the end of life, this is a caricature, but I think caricature is something in them. They want that control to continue. They want to have everything on their terms still, as they get towards the end. But I do think there's another group who are kind of motivated by compassion, but I think it's a misguided compassion. So I think there are some people who, a Christian MP, Tim Farron, speaking in the debate against this, said he acknowledged that there was compassion on both sides. Some people hear horror stories of bad deaths, maybe in their family, maybe just something they've read in a newspaper or they've been told about, and they want to do something about that. And that's good and right, isn't it? We hear a story of someone who's had a bad experience. As Christians, we want to say, we should raise up with compassion in us. We should want to help. But I think it's often misguided, as they sort of think, well, the only answer then is, well, we kill people. That's how we could end this suffering. But actually, there's a lot more that can be done. And particularly in our country, I don't know the situation in your country, but palliative care, care for dying people, is very underfunded in the UK. So actually, a big palliative care charity said that about 1 in 4 people at the moment in the UK don't get the care that they could need at the end of their life. That's about 100,000 people a year. So if we are hearing these bad stories, there's a lot that can be done to care for these people and to walk with them compassionately, and that's more costly. That's more costly in money, but it's also more costly emotionally often for those who walk with them. And so we don't want to kind of underestimate that. But that is genuine compassion, to walk with them, doing all that we can to care for them, but not to kill them in that situation. So I think, I don't want to miscaricature everyone who's pushing for this bill. I think some people are motivated by compassion, but their compassion has kind of been misdirected into thinking the answer is ending the life of the sufferer, rather than walking with the sufferer and doing what we can to alleviate their suffering until their natural death.
Thank you for framing that so clearly. The bill is being framed in the language of choice, dignity, compassion. But how does this narrative potentially mask a much more dangerous agenda.
Yeah. And I think a choice for some is a burden for all is one thing I, often have on my mind in this. And, in a sense, yeah, as you say, at a high level, it's framed about choice, isn't it? Well, it's just giving people more choice. Well, sure, you don't have to choose it, just make it a choice for others. But that is masking a deeper and darker thing going on here. Because actually, as soon as you say to this group of people, oh, here's a choice for you, all of you should now think about this, when you get to this stage in your life, maybe you too would like to go down this pathway of assisted dying. And actually the kind of a number of groups who experience kind of being undervalued in society are very worried about this bill, because they already foresee that choice will be pushed on them harder than others. So disabled charities in the UK, there's not one disabled charity that's come out in favour of this bill. Actually, the people who are caring for people who already struggle with disabilities already know, interacting with healthcare, they often have their lives treated as if they're less than, or that they're a burden on others. They know this kind of thing will get foisted on them. Ethnic minority groups as well in the UK. There's a number of people who've spoken up from ethnic minority groups. So some of the MPs who've been most against this themselves come from minority ethnic communities, because they've had that experience in healthcare. Actually, we've been treated as less than at times. We've been treated like our lives are sort of less valuable, or subtly. We've experienced that, and we fear that bills like this will get pushed on us harder.
Yeah.
So I think, there's a lot of communities who are already seeing this, or, it's being billed as a choice, but a choice easily becomes a burden or a duty. Actually, when we see that in the UK, they've just done the costings, they've put out, the government have put out the costings on this bill, and it will be cheaper. It will save the government money if you go for an assisted suicide. People are going to feel a duty to, they're not well off themselves. They see that, the grandchildren could really do with the money. It's hard to get on the housing ladder. This kind of sense of duty would be put on older, frail people to say, actually, well, you've had your innings. Maybe you should, consider kind of exiting stage left at this point. That would be the kind of noble or dutiful thing to do. So I think it's kind of something that's just billed as an optional extra is going to have seismic ripples down through society, and particularly that kind of burdensomeness, that sense of duty, as it often does, it's going to fall most heavily on those who have the least resources. And this kind of drives against a lot of the kind of work that is being done to try and improve healthcare for those groups, by actually kind of pushing this onto those groups in what could be really negative ways. So we're very worried about this bill and its impact.
Jeepers. How does this culture of choice and dignity dangerously echo past ideologies that dehumanize the vulnerable?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing, isn't it, to say we as a society think of ourselves as so progressive, and that we're the ones who've truly seen how valuable all human beings are, or that we think of some of the past victories that came in the UK Parliament, like abolishing slavery with Wilberforce and others, and how we've got that kind of legacy behind us of recognizing the true value of every human being, and saying, actually, no, we stand against the slave trade as a nation at great cost to the UK. There's a kind of noble history of coming to recognise that inherent value in every person, and that each person needs to be valued by the community, and yet here we are swinging back in the other direction and saying, well, let's have a law that says one group of people, and it's an arbitrary group. There's no rationale to why the last 6 months of life. That's not a medical line, or there's no rationale for that. But here we are saying, let's say that this group, if they say they're feeling hopeless or burdensome or helpless, and so they want to end their life, rather than offering suicide prevention that we offer to everyone else, rather than gathering around them with the care of the community, rather than reflecting to them their dignity and saying, no, it's good you're in the world. We want to do all that is needed to walk with you, to support you. Here's this group that we've arbitrarily said, actually, no, you don't get that. You get the assistance of the state to end your life. You get treated in a lesser way, as you're of lesser value.
Yes.
So it's a different group, but here we are again singling out one group of people and saying, well, you have a lesser value in some way. You don't have that, inherent dignity from within you. The dignity of your life comes from your usefulness, your lack of burdensomeness, perhaps your own perception of your life, but anything that can come and go, or that comes from without giving you that value, is unstable and is dehumanizing. When society, abolished slavery, when we came to recognize that, it was because we recognized that value was inherent within each person. It wasn't something to be earned. It was something that came from the image of God. It was a very Christian discovery. Wilberforce and others were campaigning from Christian motives, saying actually there is the image of God in each person, and that's why it's not something they earn. It's not something that comes from the way they value their life, the way others value their life. It's inherent there within them, and so they deserve to be protected and cherished. And here we are going backwards in the other direction. This is a dangerous move for sure.
Very dangerous move. Where does this bill take us next, Dr. Susan? Is there a danger of this being a stepping stone toward broader legislation of euthanasia in the UK, similar to what we've seen in Australia or Canada?
Yeah. And I think I've already pointed out that this kind of 6 months is arbitrary. So, we're trying to massage reality here and say, well, for some unexplained reason, this group are the ones, but because it's arbitrary, there's no sense to it. It doesn't cut in line with reality in every way. Immediately, pressure will be on to extend. And we've actually already seen that. So an MP has already brought an amendment forward saying, well, if someone has a neurological condition, surely they should be able to have it if it's 12 months. And at the moment, that amendment hasn't been added, but it's already being brought. We haven't even got the bill yet, and people are already saying, let's have a broader bill. So I'm sure the pressure will be on to extend the timings. Also, safeguards begin to be seen as barriers. So you've got a safeguard that says you've got to be checked by 2 doctors. Well, if that's, seen to be taking too long, well, could we slim that back? Could we get rid of some of these costly, difficult barriers for people? We can make it easier in that way. But also what we saw in Canada was that once you accept the idea of kind of death as a health treatment, then other groups will start to kind of push for the extension. So at the moment it would be terminally ill people, and as I say, the 6 months is arbitrary, so maybe we'd want to extend that. But why should others suffer? If we accept that death is a treatment, it's a treatment for what? A treatment for suffering, or a treatment for existential angst? We know actually most people choose this kind of bill for those sorts of reasons, feeling a burden and others. Why not extend it to other forms of suffering? And that's what happened in Canada. They've extended it to physical suffering that's not terminal, and then there's now legislation sort of ready to go but waiting. I think it's due in 2027 to extend it to mental illness only in Canada. And it's new legislation would have to be brought in the UK to bring those steps. But once you open this door, you've crossed a Rubicon, as they said in Parliament. There's this law is the safeguard. Once you open this door, there's no logical reason to prevent those extensions, and life is devalued. People begin to accept this as a treatment. This is a thing that people use. That extension will roll out to other groups. And we've seen that around the world. I believe you've seen that in Australia in some ways. And certainly Canada is kind of ahead of many of us in looking now to move that to mental illness. And we, one of my kind of Canadian colleagues made some videos for the UK, sort of saying, learn from us. Actually, look here, you have the advantage of being able to see what's happened here. Will you not open your eyes and look? So I think, I hope that the UK will learn ahead of the vote, and that some MPs will be scared to take this step because they've seen in other countries that this can be the beginning of many other steps that take us to frightening places, really.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you work on the front lines of policy and ethics. You've obviously shared, some of the unintended consequences, but can you see, or have you seen any other consequences within these other nations, that have already legalized assisted dying?
Yeah, I think another big one is the impact on healthcare. So there's a few different ways that we see that in other countries. So one is the kind of hospice care and palliative care as a profession. Actually, if assisted suicide or euthanasia gets wrapped up into that, then the kind of the amount of funding that actually goes to the palliative care is going down in other nations. So the same money pot gets partly spent on the assisted suicide and partly spent on the palliative care. So actually the quality of palliative care in a number of countries has been seen to worsen. And then I've already mentioned suicide prevention. I think, again, this Professor Jones at the Amscombe Centre in the UK did a kind of big study looking at across different nations that have brought this in, what's been the impact on suicide prevention. Because some have even claimed that this will prevent suicides, which is counterintuitive, and turns out to be nonsense when Professor Jones has done the work. Actually, not only do the rates of kind of non-assisted suicide not go down, in some countries they've seen to gone up. So there's the kind of people who are now having suicide from the state, and then the other group, that not only does that not go down, in some countries it goes up, and you think that's, well, as we're normalizing suicide as a right response or a good response, we're saying, actually, yeah, if you are hopeless or helpless, maybe this is the right answer as a society, we're telling you. That has a negative impact on the healthcare world in terms of our ability to offer good suicide prevention. And then another one is the relationship between doctors and patients. It's a relationship that relies on trust. Actually, when you go and see your doctor, you want to know that the options they suggest for you are options that they believe to be good for you. And that has been what stood behind healthcare ethics since Hippocrates and pre-Christian times. Actually, the idea that the doctor will offer me options they believe are good for me, and they respect my autonomy in the sense that I can choose yes or no. Do I want to take their recommendation or not, but what they're offering me is what they believe is good, and so then when the doctor offers you death, that puts pressure on you. You necessarily think, well, the doctor thinks that's good, I should at least consider it, and our bill makes it clear that doctors can offer it even to patients who aren't asking for it, which I would say is coercive. But also overall, in terms of within the healthcare system, particularly vulnerable and marginalised groups, their trust in doctors is going to go down. And that, I was speaking to a colleague who works in a kind of more deprived area of London, and he's very fearful of how this will affect him with his patient groups, because they already tend to be suspicious of him. It can already be difficult at times for him to have difficult conversations with families around end-of-life issues, and he's a wonderful Christian doctor who wants to uphold life, but people are suspicious. Why are you saying that maybe stopping this treatment, is that because you don't want the best for us? And at the moment in the UK, your doctor can say to you, look you in the face and say, no, I'm not trying to end your life at all. That's, that we can't do that. It's illegal. That's not something I'm going to be doing. The reason I'm wondering about discussing this treatment with you is because it doesn't seem to be offering any benefit anymore. And actually it's, causing you infections or it's causing you problems. And that's why we need to talk about it. But how do you have patients trust you in the future? Exactly. When actually they know that you've got the cheaper option of assisted suicide, that maybe the NHS actually would rather you went down that path, and your doctor is offering you that at times as if it's good. So kind of the doctor-patient relationship is poisoned, as well as healthcare being worsened, I think, particularly in terms of palliative care. And in terms of suicide prevention. And actually in Canada, some hospices, at least one I've heard of, had to shut down because they refused to do this. So there's another worsening of the healthcare system. So where some people have stood against this in their system, and our bill gives no protection to hospices from this happening here in the UK. If they say they don't want to do it, well, then they may lose their government funding and not be allowed to care for patients anymore. So there's not even safe spaces for those patients who would like that. So the kind of deterioration we may see in different areas of healthcare, as they've seen in other places in the world, is a big worry for lots of our members at CMF. And, they've gone into medicine and nursing because they want to offer good care. And so this threatening to kind of undermine healthcare in areas that they care about is obviously another big worry for lots of our members.
Yikes. Oh, my word. In what ways do you believe this is a spiritual issue as much as a political one?
Yeah, 100% do. I think, we know when we talk about Satan, what does Satan hate? Well, he hates God, and he hates the image bearers of God.
Yeah.
He is for death and destruction, and he's a liar, isn't he? Those are kind of the chief identifiers that we'd have for Satan. He hates God, he hates God's image bearers, and he's for death and he's for lies. And here in this bill we have lots of lies going around. Assisted dying is a lie, in a sense. It's a cloak to kind of hide what's actually underneath it, which is, what we've described, giving people drugs to kill them. So there's lies here, and there's death, isn't there? There's a culture of death, there's a culture of hopelessness and despair, and those are the things that Satan wants. So I think this is cuts in line with, the deeds of darkness, and it's absolutely not what God wants. As I've been speaking often to Christian groups about this, I often come away so glad that God hates this. The good God, the Jesus God, the one we know to be good and gracious and full of hope, and wanting to give us hope. He hates this. This is not in line with his ways. He's the God of life, and he's the God of hope, and he's the God of truth. Not like Satan. So this is not at all in line with his ways. And also, I think, you have to say, as the UK, we have a Christian heritage, but this is a sign of us turning our backs on that. I think there's lots of good evidence that we can look at for why this will do harm. But God also gives us his word because he wants us to flourish. He's a good God, and he wants us to flourish. So when he gives us clear instructions in his word that killing is wrong, those are there for our good. The good God gives us the boundary markers of flourishing. And so when we just say, well, we just ignore that, we know better, there's an arrogance there. There's an arrogance even that says, well, in the rest of the world, it's gone wrong. Canada, it's gone wrong, and but it won't go wrong in the UK. We know how to do better laws for some reason. We can do this thing in a good way. God says it won't work. Even other countries, it's not working, but we can do it. Actually, that is an affront to God, I think. As we say, well, we're going to ignore you, but we think that in ignoring you, we can produce something good. But we can't. Actually, it is in submitting to his ways that we'll find flourishing, and so this is kind of in line with Satan's ways, and it's a rejection of God's ways. And there's a verse in Habakkuk where Habakkuk is kind of despairing at what he sees around him, and then he cries out to God, God, in wrath remember mercy. And that's been a big kind of verse for me in the last months, actually, as I've prayed. I think God has a right to be angry with the UK at the moment, as he sees us turning our back on him, and even considering this law, and considering the burden it could place on the most vulnerable in our society, and not considering that as we should, and not making protection of them central in the way that we consider this. I think God has a right to be angry. But we cry out to him and say, well, God, in wrath, would you remember mercy? Would you have mercy on the UK and protect the most vulnerable and prevent us from taking this awful step? And that's my big prayer in the face of this. I don't think I'm asking God to prevent this because we deserve that, but I'm asking him to prevent it because he's a God who has mercy. And I pray that he will protect us from taking this step of arrogance and of God rejection, which I'm sad to see us even consider.
Yeah, man, thank you for speaking so clearly. It's been my prayer, honestly, for this episode, that it comes across so clear, plain as day. Dr. Susan, what should the church's response be right now? What does it look like to speak truth and protect life in such a politically charged climate?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think there's at least three things that we need to be doing, and the first is, as I've already spoken about, is prayer. Actually, we need to petition the throne of grace and say, God, in wrath, remember mercy. Actually, would you protect us? Would you particularly protect the most vulnerable amongst us from the powerful making decisions that will devalue their lives? Actually, we need to petition his prayer. As Christian Medical Fellowship, we've had daily prayer meetings. We're meeting on Zoom every evening to pray about this. We need to be before the throne of grace, and I'd encourage churches to be prayerful about this. I don't know exactly the laws in each of your states. I've looked at it a bit, but actually know what's happening in your state. Know that, and so that you can be first of all prayerful, that you can be interceding on behalf of those who may be tempted to devalue their own life if they're offered this. That you can be interceding that actually they will find someone near them who can restore their hope and not cast them into hopelessness, and pray for the policymakers actually that they will repent, or in our case in the UK that they will not take this step, that they will reject this, they will see the folly of their ways, and that they will make a decision that is in line with God's will and in line with flourishing in our nation and protecting the most vulnerable. So I think being on our knees and being prayerful is the first big thing, I would say. And then the second thing I would say is we need to find our voice. We're specifically commanded to speak up for the poor and the vulnerable, and these laws fall most heavily on the poor and the vulnerable.
Yes.
If you're very rich and have lots of resources, you can make this choice confident that your voice will be listened to, that you have other alternatives available to you, etc., etc. I would still counsel you against it, but the burden on you is nowhere near as strong as on those who don't have access to palliative care, as on those who don't have people around them who reflect value to them, those who've been mistreated for their whole lives and are used to being not listened to, come to expect that they're not valuable because that's how they've been treated. Those are the people who this will fall most heavily on, and we are specifically commanded as Christians to speak up for those people. And so this is a moment to find our voice, not because I want to protect my job as a doctor, not because whatever other reason, but because the Lord commands us to speak up for those who have the least voice. So actually, for the disabled people, it was a privilege to be outside Parliament on the day of there was a vote in November, the first vote on this. It was a privilege to be there as a Christian alongside disabled activists. They had placards that said "Assist us to live, not to die,"
Wow.
and it was right that it was Christians who were alongside them as they made that point to government. It was Christians there alongside them, supporting them, helping their voice to be amplified and heard. As a church, we need to find our voice in this moment. We need to speak to whoever has decision-making rights. In the UK, you need to speak to your member of parliament. Actually, MPs are not experts on everything.
Yeah.
And this, our members are doctors, nurses and midwives, and we're encouraging them to speak to their MPs, to actually serve their MP in that way, with their expertise, with their experience. An MP may not have spent time with vulnerable people. They might, have come from an economics background or, whatever else, which are valuable skills in some areas, but they may not understand easily the kind of impact that this will have on the most vulnerable. And so it's Christians who need to go the extra mile, outside work time. You're writing those emails, you're asking for appointments, you're putting yourself out. It's time, it's energy, but you're doing what the Lord commands, what the Lord loves, and speaking up for the poor and the vulnerable. And so this is a moment to find our voices. And those who have teaching responsibilities in churches, you need to teach your people so that they see that this is evil.
Yes.
And actually, that's a twofold responsibility. That's both so that perhaps doctors, nurses, others can speak up to policymakers, can actually make those points and understand that they need to do that, but also so that all of us understand that this is not the way. This kind of path of despair and hopelessness is not the way. If someone near to you in a country where this is legal says, "I'm thinking about this," your duty as a neighbour to them is to say, "I'm so sad to hear you say that, and I want to do all that I can to help you to find hope and to live, and to walk with you in that." Actually, we need to understand this is not a good thing for us to choose, and that we need to speak up about it, and we need to help those around us also to find their value, which I guess is the third thing we need to be doing is, Jesus doesn't only call us not to murder, he calls us to love our neighbour. So we have a higher duty than just to say no to assisted suicide. We have a duty to be like the Good Samaritan. Actually, in the story of the Good Samaritan, Jesus shows us somebody who's gives costly care to their neighbor. He pours out oil on the injured man at the side of the road. He spends money. He pays money, doesn't he, to the innkeeper to care for that man. It's costly for him, and that's how Jesus treats us. Jesus came down from heaven to be our Good Samaritan, didn't he? He came to pour out his own blood, more costly than anything we would ever spend, to pay all that was needed, to give us costly care. And then he calls us to go and do likewise, to be Good Samaritans to others. We are to be those who offer costly care, who give esteem and value the lives of others. We recognise them as neighbours, and we show in our actions that we recognise them as neighbours who are valuable. So I think that can be somebody who's considering assisted suicide, but it can also be thinking, who in my church family, who in my wider community are the people who doubt that they have dignity and doubt that they have value, and how can I act towards them so that as they look at my actions, they see and believe, I am a person of dignity and I am a person of value. Our actions need to communicate to one another. It is good that you're in the world. I'm glad that you're here, and I'm willing to be offering myself in costly care to you, to walk with you in hard times. So actually, the carer, someone who's caring for an elderly or a frail relative, actually, do they experience from us that we're willing to come alongside, to also hold the hand of their relative, to help them, to care with them, and to be part of community that sees that as good and right, not as a burden to be shoved off to the side if possible, to be ignored, and would be better if it wasn't there. Because actually we're called to say no to assisted suicide, but to say yes to costly care for neighbour, to being like the Lord Jesus, as Good Samaritans to one another when we need it. So I think, we need to absolutely pray, we need to speak up, but then we also need to love. We need to be those who express in our actions that it is good that each person we meet in a day, it's good that you're in the world, I reflect that in the way that I treat you as a neighbour, as someone who has dignity and value.
Yes, come on. Whew. The Lord led me to Proverbs 31 verse 8 to 9 just last night, and I wasn't even thinking about our conversation today, but I just felt to pull it up while you were speaking, and oh my gosh, it's just hit me between the eyeballs. It says in the New King James Version, "Open your mouth for the speechless, in the cause of all who are appointed to die."
Amen.
Open your mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and the needy.
Amen.
Yeah, that is the stance of the body of Christ. Oh, Dr. Susan, thank you for helping us see clearly today. You've brought the truth with clarity and conviction, and I pray, this is my prayer, that it stirs something deep in every single one of our listeners.
Amen.
To our audience, this is a wake-up call. This moment demands more than awareness. It demands action. There are organizations like those fighting suicide prevention, and advocates like Tom Coverley, who we recently had right here on Under the Rug. Tom's mission is to speak life into hopelessness, to pull people back from the edge, and to champion their God-given value of every human life. So how can we, in the same breath, offer state-approved death and call it compassion? Are we not directly contradicting everything that these warriors stand for? This isn't just a bill, it's a line in the sand. If we, the church, don't rise up and speak truth now, the culture will speak for us, and it will speak death. The end of life bill isn't compassionate, it's deceptive. We must reclaim our voice, our values, and our sacred commission to protect life from womb to natural tomb. The world may call it compassion, but the truth is it's convenience. Real compassion protects the vulnerable and fights for life. So let's be that voice. Let's be that church. Let's speak life boldly and without apology. Till next time, God bless.